So, da bin ich auch schon wieder zurück. Und wir haben gedroht. Trace of Zero Lesestunde. Mal sehen, wie gut meine Stimme das durchscheiden wird. Der einzige Vorteil ist, danach werden wir ein bisschen Story haben. Das heißt, ich kann die Stimme ein bisschen beruhigen lassen. Chapter 1. The Back Alley Doctor. In Liberl, the Principality of the Beautiful North was renowned across Lemuria for its advanced medical care. Its modern, well-funded hospitals attracted skilled doctors from a multitude of countries, and its cutting-edge medical technology was developed by specialists from the finest manufacturers the Principality had to offer. However, despite how brilliantly this nation's medical excellence shone, it concealed a dark side as well. The implementation of orbit technology had been put off for years in the poorer downtown districts. As a result, it lacked not only the quality of life, but a level of hospital care that the Principality was so known for. Deep in this quite rundown area, where the already charting region's wind seemed to be laid with a pronounced sting, was only a single clinic. The 40-year-old building's age was apparent by a glance. Its dilapidated exterior did a thorough job of extinguishing any hope of finding a decent general practitioner within. On this particular day, the silhouettes of two people could be seen through its dirty cracked windows. One in a mirror? Shouted an older man as his eyes hysterically darted across the sea of zeros that flooded his bill. Across from him sat a large man in his mid-30s, sporting an unkempt beard that perfectly extended his apathetic demeanor. Fear would recognize this massive muscular figure as the doctor, if not for the filthy frayed lab coat he wore. Ah, my bad. Got a number wrong, didn't I? The doctor answered in a low voice. He took the bill from the older man and quickly scribbled an extra zero on the end. Seeing the price jump by tenfold in an instant, the old man's face changed from an anxious pale to a furious shade of rest just as quickly. Dirty swindler! These treatment costs are ridiculous. I refuse to pay this. Indeed, it was far beyond that any legitimate doctor was legally allowed to charge for medical services in Ramifaria. Watching the outraged old man splutter and curse, the doctor couldn't help but laugh. Something tells me you've got more than enough mirror sitting around. How to say if any of it is clean, but I still accept it, kind man that I am. The patient was a corrupt politician. His infamy, bolstered by unending rumors surrounding his bribery and tax evasion, had come to the doctor that day with 3 bullets in his body. It was apparent by his choice of physician that the politician had landed himself in some manner of serious trouble. Trouble that would run his reputation if his wounds had become publicly known. As this particular doctor had extracted the bullets in secret, however, the standard surgery costs had been bolstered by a few additional fees to ensure his silence. I figured it would be more than a fair price in exchange for one's life, the doctor said with a calm tone that only barely concealed the threat behind his words. However, this simply served to provoke the old man even further. In rage, he threw a concealed orbital gun and thrust it into the doctor's back. The doctor, unperturbed, simply continued smiling. Oh? Well, as a physician, I feel I should advise you. Your treatment isn't quite complete just yet. If you put a bullet in me, I certainly won't be able to take the last one out of you. He turned and pointed his finger at the old man's stomach. Running his hand over the spot, the doctor indicated the old man felt a jolt of pain. There was something hard still lodged under his skin. The doctor had intentionally left the last bullet untouched. Realizing the position he was in, the old man slowly lowered his gun, a look of pain and defeat on his face. I trust it clears up the issue of the bill then. The flames of anger left the old man's eyes. All that remained was fear. Shortly afterward, the doctor finished the surgery. The doctor's name was Glenn. Despite being an exceptionally talented doctor, he was unaffiliated with any of the hospitals in the Principality, known as a back alley doctor. He treated everyone from politicians to illegal immigrants to murderers and demanded outrageous prices in return for his secrecy. A few days later, Glenn sat in his worn-down chair and gazed absently at a suitcase containing 10 million euro that had been delivered to his clinic. He moved his gaze to the window and stared at the heavy drops of rain splashing. against the pain. It was uncommon to get such leaden raindrops in the colder northern climate of Remifaria. Surely no clients would be showing up today of all days, he thought to himself as sheets of water began pounding on his window, and the din of the rain grew even louder outside. Pardon me, the sudden sound of a voice behind him snapped Glenn out of his thoughts. He turned his head to see a nurse standing in the hallway of his debilitated clinic. Sehr interessant. Ich glaube nämlich das erste Mal, dass ich mal auch so ein bisschen was direkt mehr über Remifaria auch lese. Ja, ansonsten kriegt man über Remifaria nur Sachen mit über Charaktere, die mit Remifaria verbunden sind. Mit einem Weg, über einen oder anderen Weg. Sei es die Bracerin Eolia, sei es dann später in Trace from Asher, ein weiterer Doktor. Sei es sogar schon in Trace of the Sky. Chloes Schule. Janus Royal Academy. Die vorherige Chefin von dem, sagen wir jetzt mal, Schülerrat, die halt dann gegangen ist zwischendrin, weil sie halt ihre Zeit abgesessen hat und ja, den Abschluss gemacht hat. Ist auch von Remifaria. Die werden ja auch mal irgendwann wiedersehen. So viel sage ich auch schon mal. Und ich glaube, Joachim war auch von Remifaria, wenn ich es gerade richtig im Kopf habe. Ich glaube, er hat auch irgendwie, eine Verbindung zu Remifaria. Und nein, überhaupt St. Ursula funktioniert ja nur dank der Technologie von Remifaria, die sie auch bekommen. Oder mit ihrer engen Zusammenarbeit mit Remifaria. Chapter 2, the request. Is there a doctor by the name of Glenn here? The nurse asked with a smooth, dignified tone as she stood there in the entryway of the clinic. She had a youthful beauty to her. Glenn guessed that she must have been in her early 20s. Yeah, that would be me, Glenn mentioned for her to come in. She boarded an umbrella and closed the door behind her. The umbrella clearly hadn't served her well in the windy downpour outside. Raindrops trickled from her bangs, running down her cheeks, on the fabric of her uniform, the front which was completely sodden. Glenn carelessly threw the mirror case in the corner, grabbed a clean white towel from a nearby shelf and tossed it to the nurse. She fainting and quickly dried her red hair. As Glenn watched her, he noticed that her movements had a certain charm to them. Getting a better look at her face, he found himself utterly captivated for a moment. So much so, that he nearly blurted out something along the lines of, "Haven't we met before?" He stopped himself in time, however, wanting to utter such a painfully cliched pickup line. He cleared his throat in order to regain his composure and then offered her a seat. "So, what do you want from me?" he asked. "My name is Sherry. I work as a nurse at the Erebonia General Hospital. A boy with an incurable disease was hospitalized just today. I requested you operate on him." Silence filled the clinic. Surprised by the lack of a response, Sherry turned her head inquisitively. A moment later, the response came. It started as a stifled chuckle, but quickly exploded into a great booming laughter. Glenn knew about Erebonia. It was one of the biggest hospitals in the Principality, personally backed by the head of the state, the Prince. It was a facility said to have brought together the best doctors from far and wide, and one that sported the latest medical technology on the most cutting-edge techniques. It was also a hospital that was protective of its image. Patients deemed incurable were outsourced so as to not reflect poorly on the hospital's track record. Okay. For a back alley doctor like Glenn, whose businesses relied heavily on confidentiality, this wasn't an unusual request. The thought of the high and mighty hospital administrators having to resort to asking a displaced doctor like himself for help was always a great source of amusement to him. However, well, will the distinguished gentleman in the ivory tower of a hospital mention how much is in it for me? Glenn's jovial mood subsided, and he instantly switched to a business-like demeanor. If he was going to be doing the dirty work, He planned to make sure the conversation was thorough. Sherry sternly stared back before responding, her voice firm with determination. There appears to be a misunderstanding. I'm not making this request on behalf of the hospital. This is my own personal request. Wait, what? Karen was taken off his guard by a sudden admission. With rolling eyes, Sherry continued. The boy, my patient, suffers from crystallization. Habe ich schon mal jemals mal was von Crystallization mitbekommen? Das frage ich mich gerade. Ich glaube nicht. Sehr interessant. Neuer Aspekt in der Welt, die ich kennenlerne, es gibt eine Krankheit namens Crystallization. Crystallization, John's eyes widened at the name. He knew it well, further he now understood exactly why she had come to him. The disease had great significance to Glenn. This was not an exaggeration to say it was the sole reason he became a back alley doctor in the first place. Take me to the patient. I will decide what I will do after a medical examination, he said without hesitation. Sharon nodded in agreement. Ich will mal gleich mal eine kurze Trinkpause zwischen dem Buch machen. Einfach für meinen Hals. Nicht, dass ihr euch wundert. Einmal Kanäle der komplett durchlesen. Meine Stimme war danach nicht happy. Sagen wir es mal so. Und Back Alley Dr. Glenn wird wahrscheinlich genauso lang sein. As the two of them made their way to the hospital, the rain let up, shaping them in a cold, humid air. From a distance off, the destination could be seen, standing proudly against the grey sky above. It's quite a place, isn't it? Glenn mumbled, half to himself as they arrived. Erebonia General Hospital was built only last year. It was a marvelous structure, pristine and dignified. Clearly a project the prince himself could be proud of. Dr. Glenn, this way, Sherry ushered. Just took Glenn further inside. Given that he was an outsider, not employed by the hospital, it was against Imperial's policy for Glenn to examine a patient. Knowing this, he had hoped to stand out as little as possible. Walking through the spotless, gleaming halls of the bright white ward only served to highlight the dirt and stains covering Glenn's shabby coat, and the tangled mess of hair that covered his head. Stares from patients and staff alike bore down on him as he hurriedly followed Sherry. She led him through a number of corridors until they finally arrived at the pediatric ward, room number 303. Sherry knocked thrice, wondering. Inside a young boy of about 14 years old lay in a hospital bed. As Sherry entered, he turned to her, puffed his cheeks up in indignation. "Sherry, where are you?" The boy whined to an apologetic Sherry. Brazen would be a perfect description of the child, but it was apparent that he and Sherry were close. Sherry introduced Glenn to the boy, whose name was Hugo. Hugo greeted Glenn with a friendly "Nice to meet you." Glenn, however, didn't respond. Instead, he swept his eyes around the room, spotting a violin leaning against the wall. He remembered what Sherry had taught him along the way. Said to be a violin prodigy, Hugo had already won a great number of competitions, before even reaching his teens. The month prior, magazines had run features on him, praising the young musician's skill. Just when his fame was beginning to soar, however, he was struck with crystallization. Glenn looked down at the boy and saw that he wore thick gloves on both hands. Upon seeing the gloves, the crystal doctor made a sour face. He knew patients with the disease would often use gloves to conceal the symptoms. "Let's start a medical exam," Glenn blinded announced, quickly approaching Hugo and forcibly grabbing the boy's right wrist. "What are you doing?" Hugo began struggling, but couldn't break free from Glenn's iron grip. In fact, most adults would have found it difficult to escape from the doctor's brawny arms. Sherry rarely watched over the detective's examination as Glenn removed the glove from the still struggling boy's hand. Glenn's breath caught in his throat upon seeing the gleam. There, at the end of the boy's arm, where there should have been a small tender hand, sat a cold, crystalline mass. It shone with a familiar green color, yet often a smellless gemstone. This was unmistakable. This was crystallization. Ich bin ganz überlegen. Ich habe gefühlt schon mal von dem Hugo, von dem Sherry und dem Glenn schon mal gehört. Könnten aber auch ein paar andere Charaktere in der Welt sein. Das sind alles ja keine einzigartigen Namen. Aber ja. Chapter 4, Crystallization. On close inspection, the crystal resembles a carving of a human hand down to the finest detail, like an exquisite work of art. But a sculptor talented and experienced enough to craft something so brightly lifelike had yet to be born. The reason was because the setting as well as crystal truly was once Hugo's hand. The effects would manifest quickly, transforming the body, beginning from the tips of one's fingers or toes. The process did not result in any pain, but the parts of the body affected would remain lifelessly frozen in place. If left untreated, it would continue to spread up the limb, and after about a month, it would reach the heart, resulting in death. This disease was known as crystallization. Its cause was unknown, and the only treatment that could save the victim from a cruel death was amputating the crystallized parts of the body before it spread. Hugo could survive, but at a bleak cost for an aspiring violinist like himself. Glenn stood transfixed, staring at the boy's hand. Memory surged through his mind like flashes of lightning. Even though still a respectable doctor, he had tried to take on this very disease. But it all had brought him worse. Let go of me already, you big idiot! The boy's outburst snapped him back to his senses. Being back and forth wildly, Hugo finally managed to wrench himself free of the doctor's mighty arms. He then launched into a rebel assault on Glenn, frustrated that the stranger had seen the state of his hand. The doctor waited patiently for Hugo to finish. Finally overcoming with emotion, Glenn broke down in tears. Damn it, what did you do that for? He cried as Cherry comforted him. It took a while to settle him down, but eventually he crawled back into his bed, pouting. He and Cherry left the barn and stepped outside the room. For a while, the two of them stood in silence. It was Ken who first spoke. The breast crystallization is at an early stage. If he's operated on immediately, his life will be saved. Any surgeon in the hospital can do an amputation? He paused. What do you want from me? The quiet tone of Glenn's voice was a far cry from his earlier forcefulness. It was clear all his spirit had elaborated upon seeing the boy's condition. Hugo's dream is to become a professional violinist, Sherry began, and he has more than enough talent to make it come true. For him, the dream is equal to his life. Dr. Glenn, I want you to cure his crystallization without sacrificing his hands. Sherry looked up at the doctor with pleading eyes. I want you to make the impossible possible. Dr. Sun gods, Glenn said, casting his gaze downwards. Hearing this response, Sherry felt what little hope she had evaporate. She tried to find something to say to change Glenn's mind, but no words came to her. In turn, he said nothing more himself. It was neither Glenn nor Sherry that broke that pained silence between them. Rufus? Okay. Wechsel ich gerade Rufus mit jemandem? Aber ich muss gerade noch mal mein nee. Rufus ist ein Name, der mir was sehr viel sagt. Und entsprechend deswegen ja. Ist die Frage, ob es derselbe Rufus ist oder nicht. Aber deswegen war ich gerade kurz so. Hä? Rufus? Chapter 5, Rufus. It's no news that man can do it. When Sherry looked up to see someone standing in the quiet corridor of the hospital. He was a slender, tall man, clad in a spotless white coat. He cast a piercing gaze at them from behind his silver-rimmed glass. Doctor! Okay, das ist nicht derselbe Rufus, den ich kenne. Being a nurse at Ameria General Hospital, Sherry knew him as one of the doctors and worked with him daily. Ken also happened to know this man, though it had been 10 years since they last spoke. Rufus. Ken, what are you doing here, Rufus scowled. She was lack of surprise at this exchange, but that she was aware that the two of them were acquainted. However, she could do a little more than watch dejectedly as the tension rose in the air. Rufus looked at her inside and annoyed, creased form on his brow. But I think it was a good idea to bring some back alley doctor like him here. You should know that this could hurt the hospital's reputation. The look in Sherry's eyes switched to one of her soul. She was well aware of the consequences when she brought Glenn with her and was not about to give up just yet. What do you mean by can't? She asked, challenging Rufus' words. Ken found himself wondering why Sherry's patient, the boy in the nearby room, was important to her. However, he decided against voicing this question for the moment and stood in silence. Simple, the man abandoned his work. When it came down to it, he ran away from being a doctor. No matter how skilled he may be, someone like him is incapable of curing the incurable. He cannot stop the crystallization disorder. Ken let out a tribal laugh, as though to agree with Rufus. Then without saying anything further, he turned and began walking away. Dr. Glenn! Sherry hastily followed after him. Rufus looked on as the two of them made their way down the hall. As they turned the corner, Rufus uttered a quiet "huh," before turning his attention to the nearby room. Room 303. The room where Hugo was staying. He cleared his throat and knocked 3 times on the door. Hugo, it's time for a checkup. On the rooftop of Ameria General Hospital, Glenn gazed down at the city streets lined with high-end stores and well-kept houses. The few riddled with signs of the advanced over-technology the country had been integrating brought him no peace, however. Instead, it only met him as a rough-hewn charm of the city's declining downtown. He felt it suited him much better than such a pristine sight. She stood behind him, a red expression on her face. Rufus, how good is this work? Glenn asked, more to interrupt her and change the subject than out of any actual curiosity. Unable to get around his deflection, she had no choice but to answer the sudden question. Dr. Rufus was scouted when this hospital was first founded. He saved many lives over the course of his career. In addition, he's published a great number of research papers. There are even more rumors that he's going to be hired as a professor, despite only being 34. He's an ordinary man, doing good in his own ordinary way. Glenn said with a satisfied look. Even that ordinary man wants to save the boy's life, Sherry shouted. Her outburst faded to a middle tone, as she continued. But he plans to amputate Hugo's hands. Is that what will save the boy's life? That's what should be done, Glenn said, matter-of-factly. They expected this conversation to end there, just as the previous exchange in the hallway had. Sherry would not accept this outcome, however. Dr. Glenn, 10 years ago you devised a surgical method to reverse the crystallization process. That's why, even if it's a risk, if there's a chance Hugo might be able to keep his hands, I want to bet on your success. Hearing that caught Glenn by surprise. Glenn chanced upon the idea years ago. A revolutionary technique able to reverse the process of the disease, to cure it without amputating crystallized parts. It really would make the impossible possible. Certainly, if it worked, Hugo's life and dream alike would be saved. But even so, the thought of revisiting the chapter of his past only opened the scar in Glenn's soul. After a few moments of silence, he spoke quietly. You know the technique was a failure, right? Sherry cast her eyes down in silence. She knew about her operation's outcome. And because of that, I lost her. With a somber tone, Glenn began to recount the story of his past, of the incident 10 years ago. Ja, ich merke schon, dass meine Stimme wird nicht allzu wieder drüber sein. Wie gesagt, ich will meine Stimme von Kapitel zu Kapitel wenigstens ein kleines bisschen Pause geben. Chapter 6. Katerina. 10 years ago, Glenn worked with Rufus at a hospital in the Principality of Liberl. The two of them, blessed with talent, were promising names among the young doctors. One day, the two visited a small theater, where they saw a traditional Ramifian dance known as a ballet. A dancer on stage was incredibly talented, and both men were awestruck, instantly falling for her. Her name was Katerina Ford. Oh, der Nachname sagt mir was. Ja, ich denke jetzt nicht so sehr darüber nach. The two doctors came back many times to watch her perform, and as if by fate, somehow became acquainted with this girl whose smile shone like the sun. The two men even got to know her child sister, who took a liking to them as well. It wasn't long before Glenn and Katerina fell in love. They were such a perfect match that even Rufus, his friend and rival-in-law, wholeheartedly supported the couple. However, their happy days together would be all too short. One day, Katerina came down with an incurable disease and was hospitalized at Glenn and Rufus's workplace. The disease in question was none other than crystallization. Her legs, the life of a ballerina, were mobilized, converted to beautiful as well as crystals up to her ankles. It's pretty, right? She said, smiling and holding the gemstone that once was her foot up to the light. It was Katerina's way of staying strong and positive, typical of her bright personality. Glenn and Rufus, the doctors charged with her care, found it increasingly difficult to have such an outlook, however. To save her life, they both knew there was no other way than to amputate the crystallized feet. It had to be done soon. But despite everything, they couldn't bring themselves to take such a drastic measure. For Katerina's heart still burned with passion for dancing. A passion that would be curiously snuffed out were she to undergo an amputation. Ich finde es noch sehr interessant, das heißt, die haben aber auch noch nicht so viel Forschung gemacht, was so Prothesen angeht. Ne? So, Prothesen scheinen noch nicht so ein Ding zu sein. Aber in Prothesen auch nicht unbedingt 100% helfen, aber es wäre auch eine Möglichkeit, mit der man auch arbeiten könnte. Und es gibt auch mehr als genug Leute, die mit Prothesen, vor allem auch sportlich, doch ordentlich was hinbekommen. The doctor searched desperately for an alternative, any possible method to save both her life and her legs. They scoured the records of all known cases of crystallization. They examined and re-examined her to try and find a real cause. Any possible lead or hypothesis was followed up on as quickly as possible. One day, the frenetic work finally paid off. Glenn had made a discovery. Patients with crystallization all had a common symptom: a small tumor in the heart. Initial studies suggested that this crop secreted a specific type of toxin that was then dispersed throughout the bloodstream and deposited in the extremities of the body. When it accumulated in great enough quantities, it converted a patient's hands and feet into familiar green crystals. If the tumor could be surgically removed, the root cause would be no more than the condition would slowly reverse over time. The medical world was excited over these findings. The two doctors in charge of Katerina did not rejoice. The rumor of a tumor inside the heart was an extremely dangerous operation. Even a country as renowned for top-tier medical practices as America was, it would be intensely difficult surgery. If they failed, it would mean her death. But time was not on their side. Crystallization was advancing. They had to make a decision. The only option is to remove the crystallized parts. Choosing between life and ballet is foolish, Rufus asserted. Not wanting to go through with such a risky procedure, Glenn agreed with his conclusion. Even if his love would lose her ability to dance, as long as she had her life, she could find a new passion. However, Katerina disagreed. Ballet is everything to me. Losing my legs is no different than losing my life. There's even a small chance that you can do it. I want to bet on your success, she begged the beloved Glenn. As the operation neared, Glenn grew more conflicted by the day. She was betting on his success, but it relies as the chips. The closer the surgery drew, the more he began to worry. In the end, her wishes got through to him, and he decided to do as she asked. Lewis was fiercely opposed, but upon seeing the look in Glenn's eyes, he understood his friend's resolve. Seeing that Glenn would do anything to save her, he realized there was nothing he could say or do would stop him. The day arrived. Glenn was to be the surgeon. Katerina's sisters looked on with concern as Katerina was transported to the operating room. I believe in you, Glenn, whispered Katerina. Grasping Glenn's rugged hand, she fell into a deep sleep under the anesthesia. She never woke up. Her story was finished by Rufus as he stepped out to join Glenn and Sherry on the rooftops. Afterward, Glenn abandoned the hospital. He ran away from Katerina's death and became a good-for-nothing back alley doctor. Upon hearing Rufus's words, Sherry glanced over at Glenn. What do you want, Rufus? Glenn didn't look up at his old friend. He simply continued staring down at the city below. Rufus took a moment to choose his words carefully before finally replying. The date for Hugo's operation has been decided. It's 1 week from today. Dann werden wir noch gucken. Fort. Fort sagt mir was. Kisaki. Okay, deswegen habe ich den auch schon mal gehört. Sie war mal Teil von Katsuki no Kiseki. Aber wenn ich das mir gerade mal so angucke. Timeline-technisch passt das gar nicht so zusammen, oder? Okay, ich weiß aber auch nicht, ob Katsuki no Kiseki Canon ist zu der Main Storyline. Weil das ein Mobile-Game war. Ich würde vielleicht sowieso mal gucken, ob wir uns mal vielleicht, nachdem wir mit den Crossbell durch sind, mal so ein bisschen die Timeline angucken bis zu dem Punkt, was bis dahin alles so relevant ist. Weil es gibt nämlich auf dem Wiki eine sehr gute Timeline-Seite eigentlich. Natürlich werden da auch schon Erebonia-Sachen und sowas mit drin sein, aber die werde ich vorher rausfiltern, um Spoilers zu vermeiden. Chapter 7, The Clash. Upon hearing the news from Rufus, Sherry immediately objected. Oh, wait, Dr. Rufus, it's too soon. Unfortunately, the symptoms of crystallization will not wait. We need to operate as soon as we can, Rufus responded. Johannesburg told to them did not show any reaction. He simply continued to gaze down at the city as he silently listened. He discussed this with Hugo, and he consented to it. As soon as you aren't in a position to object, he continued. His cold statement temporarily got the better of Sherry. Without any way to dispute Rufus' words, she bit her lip in pain dismay. The worst part she knew he was right. Hugo's 14-year-old body was much smaller than an average adult's, but the time left until the crystallization reached his heart was also shorter. It was a natural, logical decision for a doctor to proceed with the surgery as soon as possible. Even so, Sherry protested. Doctor, do you think nothing of Hugo losing his hands? What I'm concerned with, Rufus replied without hesitation, is whether he loses his life. Preserving that is my top priority. He won't be able to pursue any dream if he dies. In his words, Sherry could feel the pain he felt at losing Katerina. Knowing this, she couldn't hide her sorrow. Rufus looked past Sherry to the large framed doctor who was still looking out over the city. I saved the child, he declared to Glenn. Good, saves me the trouble of declining, Glenn said as he returned and began to leave, his eyes avoiding Rufus as he passed. Do your best, Dr. Rufus. Not only waved goodbye. Speck turned to the others as he exited the rooftop. Pathetic, muttered Rufus. With that over, he urged Sherry to return to work, telling her that he would let the fact she had secretly called in an unrighteous doctor slide this time. Her shoulders sagged as she listened. Her eyes were fixed on the ground. She was lost in her force and swirling emotions. Don't involve him. It will only make this more difficult for you, Rufus concluded. Sherry raised her head at those words and looked into Rufus's eye. I'm sorry, Dr. Rufus. There's one thing I forgot to tell Dr. Glenn. What? Rufus was confused. She did not answer the question, however, and simply began hurrying after Glenn. Rufus was left alone on the roof. The wind began to pick up, causing his white coat of bladder. He rubbed his temples and let out a long, deep sigh. Was mich noch gerade irgendwie überlegen lässt, was diese Crystallization-Krankheit angeht. Wenn sie original von einem Tumor kommen, der im Herzen sitzt, das kontinuierlich Gift im Körper verteilt. Ist Amputation auch wirklich eine langfristige Lösung für die Krankheit? Wenn du die Teile amputierst, heißt das nur, das Gift wird sich woanders weiter absetzen. Deswegen verstehe ich nicht ganz, warum Amputation sozusagen als Heilung reicht. Weil es ja eigentlich nur ein Symptom behebt und nicht die Ursache des Ganzen. Chapter 8, Irritation. Glenn returned to his clinic downtown. He found the blaze just as he had left it. After walking through the pristine white halls of the hospital, however, he was all the more aware of how shabby and disorderly his tiny little clinic was. He gazed over to the corner. He had brought a case full of mirror. Still sat there, rather among dusty cobwebs. Even if the building he worked out of was 40 years old, he'd surely be in a better shape if he maintained it every now and then. And thanks to his confidentiality fees, it wasn't as though he lacked for mirror. He simply didn't have the energy for it. Ken, you're a respectable doctor. Katarina would chide him. You should care more about how you look. The words bubbled up in his mind as he slumped down in his worn-out chair. There was something that she had said to him on more than one occasion back when she was still alive. Being a ballerina, she was always conscious of her appearance, both on and off the stage. Katarina was elegant, beautiful, and bright. She was everything Glenn lacked, which is also what attracted him to her in the first place. In all likelihood, the same was true of Rufus as well. Glenn's mind darted to another familiar thought. One he had repeatedly dwelled on for the past decade. How would everything have turned out if she had chosen Rufus instead of him? After coming down with crystallization, she was left with but two options. Give up her legs to ensure the survival, or try to save her legs by gambling with her very life. She chose the latter and begged Glenn to attempt the risky surgery. Though initially unsure, he eventually sympathized with her and attempted it. Had she went with Rufus, however, in Glenn's mind there was a chance Rufus would have chosen to go against her wishes in order to save her life. If things had turned out that way, she would have survived. Without her legs, she would still be around. She might have even found a new passion, one just as dear to her as ballet was. Oder wäre in eine tiefe Depression gefallen, das hätte auch ein möglicher Outcome sein können. Ken knew also well that thinking on what ifs was utterly useless. And even so, he had spent every single day in the 10 years since her death going over every detail, replaying every mistake, and theorizing every other possible outcome. Each day, he sank a little further into his regret until he was drowning in it, no longer able to see the surface. The day was staring though. After returning from America, Ken's heart churned like a stormy sea. Was seeing Hugo's crystallized hands the course? But hearing how the boy had to choose between his dreams and his life hit too close to home? Perhaps it was simply from seeing Rufus again after all these years. Or maybe it was all of the above. Coming up against such a familiar situation and having to live through death. The same traumatic events that sent him down the path to becoming an back alley doctor. Regardless of the course, he was irritated. Drawing short, ragged breaths, he went to his desk and opened the second drawer. After digging the bag for a moment, he dragged out an old massive file. It bore no title, but on one look at its size and the sheer number of papers stuffed in it was a clear sign of just how many years it took to compile. Glenn stared at it in silence for a moment. Suddenly a white hot rage bubbled up inside of him, and using the full force of his brawny arms, he threw the file with all his might. It hit the wall with a dull thud, twisting open and scattering its contents all over the floor. The outburst did not bring Glenn any peace, however. As he watched the paper flutter down before him, the only thing he felt was a sputtered heartbreak burden. "Doctor," said the sound of a voice from behind him snapped Glenn out of his thoughts. He was sad to see someone standing in the hallway. It was the nurse from Erebonia General Hospital, Sherry. She looked around the room in surprise at the papers scattered across the floor. "It is about the operation. It was already settled, remember?" Glenn growled in a low voice, glaring angrily at her. He was taken aback for a moment at the darkness in his gaze, but quickly regained the composure. "I've only come here to tell you something I'd forgotten to mention before," she said. "Something you got for mention," Glenn said. His patience running thin. Confusedly Claire's would quickly transform into a worried expression, however, as she continued. "Sherry's just my nickname," she said in a firm voice. "My full name is Cheryl Ford. The woman you loved, the one who lost her life to crystallization. I'm her sister." Chapter 9, Sherry. "You're carrying your sister?" The shock of it all sent Glenn waiting for a moment. Sherry remained composed, however. She looked straight at him and nodded. Looking into her eyes, it was clear to Glenn she was telling the truth. Cheryl. You remember the name. She was Carolina's younger sister. She had seen her many times during Carolina's hospital stay. Cheryl had been with her older sister since on that fated day. By the way, kleiner Hint, da wurde ja schon drauf gehintet im Buch vorhin, bei seinen Gedanken, wo er meinte, das Gesicht ist irgendwie bekannt. But until she was taken into the operating room. When he close at Sherry, the resemblance was obvious. She had a familiar kind of dignity and elegance in her eyes, and the same grace in her movements, Katerina once said. Ken felt ashamed at failing to recognize her. Was he so disconnected from those he once cared for? He stood there for a moment, losing his force. Sherry broke the silence. Your cure for crystallization cost my sister her life, but why did she request such risky surgery in the first place? I never thought about the reason of the clan. I thought she could keep your legs and continue being your ballerina, Karen responded effectively. Sherry shook her head. It wasn't just that. The day after you discovered the idea, she told me she wanted to try it. I was against it, but heard it was very risky. I told her I wanted her to give up ballet in order to guarantee she would live, but she didn't hesitate in her reply. She closed her eyes and put a hand to her chest as she recounted her late sister's words. I want to do it, not just for my own sake, or so that I continue ballet. This is a terrible illness. When I was told the only way I could survive would involve losing my legs, I was in despair. But when Glenn told me he discovered a new surgical technique to cure it, I felt a warm light shining inside my heart. I think this is what hope is. If this method succeeds, it could bring the same hope to other patients with crystallization. I know this operation is still imperfect and comes with high risk, but that's exactly why I want to be the first to try it. If it succeeds or fails, I'm sure that Glenn will learn something and be able to perfect it further. Before long, nobody will have to fear crystallization because one way or another my beloved Glenn will succeed. Hearing Katarina's words, Glenn couldn't shake the feeling that she was talking directly to him through her sister. Sherry continued. I mourned her death of my sister too, and yet I can't help but recall how you and Dr. Rufus did everything you could to save her. The respect I had for the two of you led me to pursue nursing. So please, Doctor, don't regret your choice. A message delivered, she bowed. After a long moment of silence, she raised her head and quickly left the clinic. Glenn, still speechless, slowly and shakily lowered himself down into his chair. For what seemed like hours, he stared at the spot where Sherry had stood. The irritation he had felt before he had vanished. Had vanished, leaving a sudden clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. He now finally knew what Katarina had been thinking back then. He had heard her words from 10 years ago, and his sister had left him with parting words of her own. Don't regret your choice. All he had to do now was to decide how to respond. The next morning, Glenn began carefully picking up the papers scattered across his floor. The regret and anger that filled his eyes the day before had been replaced by the fires of determination. Wir haben gar nicht mehr so viel vor uns. Nur noch 5 Bücher, yay. Chapter 10, Hope. It was the evening, 3 days before Hugo's invitation was to take place. After the date had been decided, Rufus, as the boy's doctor, had been visiting his room each day to explain a little more about the procedure. Are listening, Hugo? Rufus asked in a tactful tone of voice. Since the surgery had been scheduled, Hugo had been absent-minded and listless. Sorry. The reason was clear to everyone there. He had no hope for a future without his hands. A future where he had never again played the violin. Sherry, the nurse assigned to care for Hugo and assist Rufus, could hardly bear it. I hate this, Hugo said suddenly, gazing down at the thick gloves that covered his crystallized hands. Why me? Why am I the one that has to go through this? Sherry bit her lip to hold back her frustration. It will be okay, Hugo, she said. Having lost her sister to the illness, she knew just how hollow her words must have sounded to the boy, but she couldn't think of anything else to say to. Dr. Rufus, however, calmly responded. I've seen many patients over the course of my career. Among them, there were some whose lives slipped away without even so much as a glimmer of hope that they might survive. In your case, however, the survival can be guaranteed. As long as you undergo the procedure, you will live on. You're about to find a new path in life. I think that's fortunate, don't you? His first left the boy in a room to object. Hugo gritted his teeth for a moment, but seemed to deflate a bit afterward, as though resigning himself to his fate. This is fine, Rufus thought. As long as he lives, he will still have possibilities. He only needs to find a new passion, not like Katarina. When she lost her light, she also lost all her potential futures. An answer like that is just like you, a baritone voice interrupted. Everyone there turned to look at the entrance to the room. There, his pretty figure filling the doorframe, stood the back alley doctor. Dr. Glenn, Dr. Glenn, Sherry gasped, her head filled with the relief of what felt like the first time in a while. Glenn showed her a small smile. Why are you here? Rufus adjusted his glasses and shot at a glare at the unkempt man from behind his silver rims. Without answering, Glenn merely stared back at the look in his eyes, alone repelling the question. Rufus frowned. The Glenn that stood before him now seemed worlds apart from the man he last saw in the hospital's room. Glenn looked at Hugo in the bed. A flash of discomfort briefly washed over the boy's face as he recalled the doctor's previous year of treatment. The feeling quickly faded, however, as the apathy and despair that had taken hold of Hugo's heart reasserted itself. Your name is Hugo, right? Glenn asked, looking down at the boy in the hospital bed. Tell me, are you willing to risk dying? Glenn's abrupt statement startled everyone present. Not waiting for a response, Glenn continued. There's a procedure that can cure your crystallization without amputating your hands, but it comes with high risk. It's not something you can just overcome through sheer determination. The danger is real, and the consequences could be fatal. You must be willing to accept it. Are you? Each word he uttered was like a weight dropped on the 14-year-old mind. Looking at Glenn's eyes made it clear he was not overstating how risky this procedure was. It truly could result in Hugo's death. If he had the resolve, if he was willing to take the risk, then everything could be over without losing his hands, without losing his musical aspirations. Hugo, come with emotion, stared at the two cry. The wishes he had buried, the feelings he had repressed for the sake of his survival, burst out from him all at once. I would die for these hands. The light of hope was shining in his heart. Boah, 11 Seiten. Chapter 11 Resolve. Hugo should reconsider. He was really interjected. Victoria's addressing Hugo, his gaze was fixed squarely on Glenn. He was shot of fierce glare at his former colleague. This procedure to cure him without losing his hands is the same procedure you attempted on Katerina. You should know better than anyone what a failure that was. The cold anger in Rufus's voice pierced Glenn like icy daggers. Response Glenn held up a thick file he was carrying. This is the result of all the research I've done in the 10 years since I became a Beckley doctor. It was the fire to Rufus who was taken off guard for a moment by its sheer rate. He began scanning through the documents. The file contained an enormous amount of research about crystallization, clinical records, medical cases, reports of procedures and results. It was obvious some materials were illegally obtained, but they were highly informative. As Rufus reached the final document in the file, his eyes widened. The document was a highly detailed description of a new surgical procedure different from the one Rufus knew of, the one that had cost Katerina's her life. I developed that after going over a thing that happened during Katerina's surgery back then. It's all thanks to her, Glenn said quietly before falling silent. It was clear he had continued fighting the crystallization disease for a long time, even after he left the lawful medical practice. Years of treating patients as a Beckley doctor had allowed him to research and perfect a new procedure. Because one way or another, my beloved Glenn will succeed. Realizing her sister's words were right, Sherry began to softly cry. It's true that by performing the procedures this way, the odds of the patient's survival should be greatly increased, said Rufus after glancing over the document. The effectiveness of Glenn's perfected technique was immediately clear to him. Hugo even perked up upon hearing Rufus' approval. However, Rufus then looked up at Glenn, the same icy glare still in his eyes. Even so, I cannot hand my patient over to you. Why? Sherry stammered, bewildered. Glenn simply stood silently as Rufus continued. I've heard from Sherry how Katerina faced the danger of the surgery in order to give you more experience. To ensure that even if she did not survive, others would. She resolved to sacrifice her own life for that. But you? Rufus' eyes narrowed as it continued to glare at Glenn. In the face of her death, you choose to run. You fled the hospital to go wallow in an alley for a decade. Your resolve is nowhere near hers, and I refuse to entrust one of my patients to someone as weak-willed as you. Glenn closed his eyes and let Rufus' words sink in. They cut through him like finely honed blades, made all the more sharp by the fact that he knew every word was true. You're absolutely right, he said. Back then, I didn't have the bare minimum of resolve needed to take down his disease. As a result, I ran away and started drowning in my regrets. Got Dr. Rufus square in the eye. But you know what? Thanks to these past 10 years of wallowing in an alley, I've learned a few things. As he finished speaking, he moved his hand to his hip. He felt a familiar sensation of the cold metallic object he had concealed there. Holding it gripped firmly, he pulled it out and pointed directly at Rufus. Rufus registered what was going on, but when his eyes finally focused on the object now hovering right before the tip of his nose, he realized he was looking down the barrel of a rainford-made oval gun. The light from the setting sun flooded through the room's windows and cast a golden gleam on the weapon's surface. Despite the warm light, it felt as though the air in the room had suddenly froze. Are you threatening me? Rufus finally forced out a question to break the stunned silence. The sound was defiant, but he could do nothing to hide his trembling. He smirked wryly and began to move his finger toward the trigger. And suddenly, in one fluid motion, he flipped the gun around in his hand. The muzzle spun toward him. The situation was reversed with it. Since a patient bears a risk of dying, it only makes sense that I, as his doctor, should also bear an equal risk. And that, offering the gun to Rufus. If the surgery doesn't succeed, I want you to use this to kill me. It was clear from the steely look in Glenn's eyes that he was absolutely serious. This was his unique resolve, forged from years of dealing with criminals, the resolve only a doctor of the underworld could have. A silence fell over the room as everyone there awaited Rufus' answer. He calmly closed his eyes, his expression hidden by the sunlight reflecting off his lenses. After a moment, he reached out and grabbed the grip of the gun. What a stupid stunt, said a small grin on his face. But resolve seems to be enough at least. If you truly think this procedure of yours can save Hugo, then I'll bet on your success too. Chapter 12, The Operation. Rufus summoned all the doctors who were to be involved in the operation, now taking place in 2 days, to one of the hospital's conferences room. They introduced Glenn's new surgical procedure to them, arguing it was the most effective means of dealing with crystallization. Harry received a cold response from the other doctors at first. They were not about to easily trust some unlicensed doctor running a back alley clinic. Not only was his skills caught in question, but his shady reputation preceded him, making it difficult for the pair to gain any ground in the prestigious hospital. Despite it, Rufus was undeterred and continued to lobby for their approval in performing the procedure. His ardent persuasion, combined with the impressive merits of the procedure and Glenn's thorough explanation of it, slowly won him over, and one by one, they withdrew their objections. With the hospital on board with the plan, Rufus and Glenn began going over the steps of the surgery over and over every single day they had before it was scheduled to take place. They wanted to do everything they could to ensure things would go as planned. For her part, Nurse Sherry continued to look after Hugo. His mood had undergone a dramatic change the past few days. Before, when he was certain he would lose his hands, his eyes were dull and listless, but now they were bright and alive. He had hope. All too soon, the day of the operation arrived. His parents, Chop had unfortunately kept him unable to frequently visit the hospital in person, made time to come to see their son into surgery. I'll see you soon, he said to them as he was prepared to the operation. Both he and his parents were aware there was a chance those would be his final words. And so he gave them a brilliant smile as a reassurance before he was taken away. He had no fear himself. The presence of the two excellent doctors overseeing the operations was all he needed. Hugo was given a seizure and finally taken into the operating room. Ken and Rufus were sterilized and the surgical instruments that had been prepared were laid out. As an attending physician, Ken stood before the unconscious patient. The other doctor, led by Rufus, the doctors, led by Rufus, took the cue and headed to their respective positions. For the first time in nearly a decade, Glenn had tidied himself up. He is now wearing clean light blue surgical attire. His normally squiggly hair had been tied back, and almost gave his appearance a hint of elegance. Or at least it would have had it not been safely tucked into a surgical cape. Miss Sherry was there as well, attending the operation as an assistant to Glenn and Rufus. She exchanged a wordless glance with Glenn, and he nodded in response. At long last, the time had come. Right then, I started the procedure. Glenn announced. Rufus handed him his scalpel, and he began. His cavalry drew a sharpened tool across the incision lines that had been marked on the boy's chest, and his skin parted without resistance. As humanity evolved, so too did the human body refine itself over countless generations. The various systems and parts came together to work as one beautifully whole, like an elegant link of an orbital gears. The body is an incredible machine, astronomically more complex than anything mankind was able to create, despite all of their advances. And yet, as incredible as they are, bodies will still break down, whether due to illness or injuries. A body will require repair and maintenance. It's the doctor's job to fix that which is broken and restore a body to working condition. To do whatever is required to prolong the dazzling gleam of life as much as possible. No matter if it was the spotless operating room of a prestigious hospital or the worn, crunchy halls of his back alley clinic, each time Glenn performed the surgery, it was a duty he felt delighted and privileged to be able to perform. He was grateful to the goddess for giving such a talent. With that gratitude in his heart and the skillful movements of the scalpel in his hand, Hugo's operation was progressing smoothly. Everyone in attendance stood in awe of Glenn's artful surgical skills as they played their own parts to perfection. Sherry wiped the sweat from his brow, Rufus handled the surgical tools, and the other doctors oversaw key elements such as medical equipment and anesthesia. At last, the boy's heart was exposed. Reaching this part in the surgery typically took quite some time, but after watching Glenn's effortless movements, it almost seemed to everyone there like it had taken no time at all. Down in Hugo's chest cavity, his heart beat with a healthy tempo and color. Heavy, with the exception of a sinister dark mass that clung to the organ's surface. This was the cause of everything. The tumor that resulted in the body's crystallization. This malignant growth had taken Katerina's life and countless others. A little more, hang in there, Hugo, she whispered to the sleeping boy, but his scan stared at the murky tumor at the set. In front of him, his hand froze. Place. Chapter 13, Reise. What's wrong? I was asked, noticing Glenn's sudden hesitation. Dr. Glenn? Sherry looked up at him with concern. Yes, I looked on in confusion, noticing what had happened. And when Glenn caught sight of Hugo's pulsing heart, marred by this small blackened lump, his mind was pulled back to Katerina's surgery. On a day 10 years ago, everything had broken smoothly. And by our appearances, the operation had been successful. Heart surgery is always a highly dangerous undertaking, but Glenn, gifted with talent as he was, had succeeded in removing the crystallization tumor without incident. Everyone participating in the surgery watched as the color returned to the heart, believing they had finally triumphed over the disease. They had been too quick to celebrate, however. The tumor had been more closely tied to the surrounding tissue than expected, and removing it weakened the wall of the heart considerably. Just as Glenn was closing up the chest, the part of the heart where the tumor once had tore open, resulting in a large hemorrhage. Ich glaube, so wird es ausgesprochen. Katerina's life flickered out swiftly after. As Glenn stared at the familiar side of the tumor on Hugo's heart, his own was gripped by fear. The fear that history would repeat itself. That he would be responsible for another death. Glenn's body stiffened, his mind went black, and his focus shattered as he began drowning in his past regrets once more. Glenn! A powerful yell from his old friend snapped him back to reality. Rufus had seized Glenn's heels and was shaking him. You should know better than this. Think of absolutely nothing else besides the operation. The only thing that matters right now is saving Hugo's life. This boy, he believes in you. Show him his trust was not misplaced. Ken was taken aback. He looked at the sleeping boy whose heart lay exposed on the operating table. Widum, widum, widum. The heart pounded as if calling out to Glenn, telling him that the boy still lived and could still be saved. That's right, this isn't the time to be spacing out, Glenn thought. He took a brief moment to compose himself and once again faced Hugo, his eyes set with resolve once more. Seeing just Roof will let go of him and signaled the others to resume the operation. Shay sighed in relief and readied himself to continue. Roof assumed the position opposite Glenn. It was time to perform the new technique, the segment of the operation that Glenn had refined since their last attempt. The tuber had a secret, with the exception of the central part that secreted a toxin responsible for the crystallizing effect. It is almost completely harmless. Given time, it will be reabsorbed into the rest of the nearby hard tissue with no ill effects. In other words, so long as the toxic segment was excised, there was no need to remove the rest. The smallest match to the procedure would have made all the difference in Katerina's surgery. And Glenn discovered this during his research. Pangs of regret dug deep into his chest. However, Katerina and Sherry's words had turned his regret into gratitude. This refined technique existed and could be used to save so many lives, all thanks to Katerina's sacrifice. A small smile crossed Glenn's lips as he briefly reflected on all of this. A heart and lung machine was connected, and drugs were administered to temporarily halt Hugo's heart. Both were cutting-edge medical technology that Rufus had made special orders to obtain for his operation. With the heart lying still, Glenn carefully adjusted it to have a closer look at the tumor. Removing only the central part would require several extremely precise cuts. One wrong move, and the walls of the heart would be injured. But if successful, they could safely extract the toxins while avoiding a repeat of Katerina's complications. Sherry folded her hands. Katerina, please Glenn, your strength. She whispered in prayer. Glenn lowered his scalpel down toward the darkened tumor. Sherry, Rufus, and the other doctors closely watched the sharp tip, each of them holding their breath. Outside the room, Hugo's parents, fraught with worry, fervently prayed to the goddess for their son's survival. They dutifully waited since the surgery began for what felt like an agonizingly long amount of time, and they were nearly at their wits' end. As I said before, they couldn't take any more, the operating light turned off. There's an eye snapped to the door. Anxious for answers. Was everything okay? Would their son live? The door opened and Glenn, a large silhouette, filled its frame. Hugo's parents rushed towards him in a desperate hope, plain on their worried faces. Glenn looked at the two of them and slowly moved the surgical mask behind it. His face was covered in a white grin. Ich merk's langsam, meine Stimme wird langsam. Aber da hängt ein paar dicken Pausen. Das ist nicht ganz so schlimm wie mit Cornelia. Finally, Glenn. A month later, in a private room at Ameria General Hospital's children's ward, the sound of a violin drifted out from Hugo's room. Both his hands had reverted to their former tender softness, and the natural hue had been restored. Not a trace of the unnatural green luster remained. However, the sensation had not quite yet returned to Hugo's fingertips, making the task of deftly wielding a violin bowl difficult for even one of Hugo's natural talents. Despite this, he simply could not wait any longer to return to his beloved music after being deprived of it for so long. His parents were visiting that day, and he tried to play an advanced song at his usual level for them. But the only sounds of the violin gave off were a series of shrill screeches. His parents forced smiles on their faces, encouraged him, but Yuto didn't seem to mind one bit. A genius such as myself needs to try some avant-garde pieces every once in a while, he said with a cheeky grin, causing his parents to laugh. He could play violin once again, that was more than enough for him. And he couldn't help but be ecstatic for that fact alone. He continued to play his strange experimental piece, and the three of them laughed together. The sound of a small concert drifted up to Glenn as he stood on the rooftop and looked down at the city once more. He had been stopping by the hospital every so often to observe Hugo's post-operation recovery. After finishing his regular medical examination, he had taken a liking to going up to the rooftop. He leaned on the railing, gazing down at the city streets, and felt the breeze on his face. The sights from the roof seemed different to him now, the sights and sound a little more warm and inviting. He still preferred the familiarity of the dingy streets he had become accustomed to, but this part of the city was nice in its own way. On this particular day, Rufus and Sherry had joined him on the roof. Ken, are you listening? Rufus questioned him. He and several others at the hospital had spent the last month trying to recruit Glenn. Don't you think it would be best for everyone if you worked here? There had been an especially strong push to hire Glenn from the medical specialists that had seen his surgical skills firsthand. They considered it a regrettable waste for a man of his obvious skill to live in obscurity in the downtown district. He invented a new entirely new surgical procedure to rescue civilization, he told him as they gazed down at the city streets. You could make a name for yourself here as a respectable doctor. However, just like every time prior, Glenn's answer was a stubborn no. There are many people that come to my clinic downtown, he explained. They depend on me, and I don't intend to leave them now. I might just be some back alley doctor, but I'm their back alley doctor, you know? Glenn's answer with a grin. I see. A pity then, so polite, a small smile flickering across his face. She checked the roach and let out a small gas. Doctor, isn't it almost time for your rounds? I was not in turn to leave, but looked back at Glenn before I left. Then continuing living as a back alley doctor, he said, just be sure you can proudly tell Katerina when you see her next that the path you chose was one you don't regret. With this, Rufus left. Such a harsh type of encouragement from his old friend brought an annoyed smirk to Glenn's face. I don't need you to tell me that, he muttered. Glenn and Sherry were left alone on the rooftop. There was an awkward silence between the two, made all the more apparent by the occasional screeches of Hugo's violin drifting out of his window. Ich stelle mir das schon lustig vor, wenn du das als angucken, war das so gut. The silence continued until Glenn, unable to bear it any further, breathlessly turned and began heading to the exit. Before he could make his escape, however, Sherry let out a soft that stopped him in his tracks. Dr. Glenn, I just wanted to thank you so much for everything you've done, she said. I feel like I finally understand why my sister chose you. After a decade of being repaid with a gun to his back, hearing such a formal, heartfelt thanks coming from the same direction, Fu craned up a bit. There's no need for that, he responded. His voice was softer, more sincere than normal. Because of you, I was able to understand what happened with Katerina, so I guess I'm the one who should be thanking you. Sherry was surprised by the sudden shift in the attitude compared to Glenn's normal riot deflection. Now to think about it, she said. You told me that you didn't take the payment for the surgery, doctor. In recognition of his miraculous surgery, the hospital had offered him a payment of mirror. Though there were laws that restricted the amount they could give him, it was still an incredible sum of mirror to the average person. Can I turn it down, however, telling them to spend it on Hugo's post-op expenses? Well, I don't want to accept their chump change, said Glenn, quickly returning to his usual demeanor. But I guess, once that Brett's well enough to get on stage again, I'll have him send me free tickets to all his concerts. The thought of the infamous back alley doctor Glenn attending a fancy violin concert brought a smile to Sherry's face. Doctor, do you remember when I first visited you? She asked. I said this wasn't a job from the hospital, it was a personal request. So if you aren't interested in the hospital's payments, it was lowered in a soft purr, perhaps I could pay you personally. What? Suddenly flustered, Glenn turned around only to find Sherry standing there, giggling, a mischievous smile on her face. Glenn beat red, and a tiny bit miffed at being the victim of such a prank, turned and quickly retreated from the hospital. Sherry, now alone on the rooftop, leaned down the railing where Glenn had been. She looked up at the sky cheerfully. He's a wonderful person, Katerina, she whispered, as the soft breeze fluttered by, and a few harmonious notes from a violin drifted up to her ears. She almost felt like she could hear her sister laughing. The End. Und meine Stimme ist noch nicht so sehr gekillt wie bei Canelia. Aber ich merke trotzdem, meine Stimme ist nicht ganz so happy. Aber hey, ich hoffe, ihr mögt es, dass ich das für euch vorlese. Ich denke mal, früher oder später wird es auch irgendwann mal wieder zurückkommen. Dadurch, dass ich so viel getrunken habe zwischendrin, einfach für eine kurze Pause bei meiner Stimme. Ich mache nur eine kurze Toilettenpause und danach machen wir wirklich mal weiter mit Story. Bis gleich.